The gods do not love as mortals do, and that is the only reason the world still stands. This is a truth the Maya knew well, whispered in the smoke of copal incense, carved into the stone faces of temples that pierce the jungle canopy like broken teeth. But there was a time before time learned to measure itself properly, when a goddess loved as mortals love, and the heavens themselves bent under the weight of that forbidden passion. What follows is the price that was paid, the transformation that could not be undone, and the choice that drowns us still. In those days when the world was younger and the distance between earth and sky had not yet hardened into law, there lived a mortal man named Cowil in a city whose name has been swallowed by the jungle. He was not a king, though kings sought his counsel. He was not a priest, though priests envied his devotion. He was a weaver, and in his hands the threads of cotton and maguey fiber became poems, became prayers, became windows into worlds that should not be seen by mortal eyes. Cowil had learned his craft from his grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother, back through a line of women stretching into the time of first things. But Cowil was the first man in 7 generations to take up the sacred loom, and for this transgression of custom, for in those days weaving belonged to women as the hunt belonged to men, he had been marked. Some said blessed, others said cursed. The truth, as with all true things, was that the marking made no distinction between blessing and curse, being simply a doorway through which larger forces could flow. His fingers moved across the backstrap loom with a sureness that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself. While other weavers created geometric patterns and repeating symbols, Cowil's textiles told stories. In one cloth, the emergence of humans from the caves of creation. In another, the ballgame of the hero twins in the underworld of Xibalba. And in his finest work, which he kept hidden in a cedar chest and showed to no one, he had somehow captured the face of the moon itself, not as it appeared in the sky, but as it appeared in dreams, when the soul travels the night roads and sees things as they truly are. It was this cloth that called to Ixchel. She had been young once, the moon goddess, young and radiant, moving through her palace above the clouds with steps that made no sound. Her beauty in those days was not the beauty of stillness, but of constant change, waxing and waning, growing and diminishing, dying and being reborn with each cycle. She presided over waters and tides, over the monthly blood of women, over the growth of crops and the workings of medicine. But her greatest art, the art that filled her with pride and purpose, was weaving. On her celestial loom she wove the fabric of fate itself. The threads were lives, countless lives, mortal and divine, and they crossed and recrossed in patterns of such complexity that even the gods who claimed dominion over time could not fully comprehend them. Each night as she wove, the moon would show a different face to the earth below, and those who understood such things knew that what they saw, reflected in the sky, was merely the shadow of her work, the light and dark of warp and weft made visible. But weaving alone, even the weaving of destiny, grows cold. The moon is a lonely place. The stars are distant cousins who speak in languages of light, incomprehensible to one who works in thread and fiber. And though Ixchel had her consort, the great jaguar sun god who blazed across the day sky in his spotted magnificence, their love was of the ancient formal kind, a dance of cosmic necessity, a marriage of light and darkness that maintained the balance of all things. They circled each other in appointed rounds, came together in eclipse, drew apart according to celestial law. There was grandeur in it, but no tenderness. There was power, but no surprise. It was surprise that drew her down to the mortal world. She had sensed it first as a disturbance in the weaving, a thread that moved in ways threads should not move. Curious, she had looked closer, and in looking had seen the cloth that Cowil had made. In his mortal hands, with his mortal threads, he had somehow captured not just her image, but her essence. The loneliness of her circling, the weight of her endless work, the hunger for something she could not name. He had seen her truly, this mortal man who should not have been a weaver at all. He had seen her in a way her divine consort never had. Ixchel descended to the earth on a night when the moon was dark, when her absence from the sky would not be noted. She took the form of a young woman. Not a disguise exactly, for this too was one of her true forms, and walked the night roads until she came to Kawil's city. The jungle pressed close around the white limestone buildings, and she could hear the night monkeys howling their strange songs, the jaguars coughing in the darkness beyond the cleared fields. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of ripening cacao. She found him in his workshop, still weaving by the light of a single oil lamp. His face was lean and angular, marked by the ritual scarification that showed his devotion to the divine. His eyes, when he finally looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, were the color of good earth after rain. He did not know her for what she was. How could he? She was careful to veil her divinity, to appear as nothing more than a young woman drawn by the reputation of his craft. "I have heard," she said, and her voice was like water moving over stones, "that you weave stories into cloth. I have come to learn." Kawil rose from his loom, and his first words to her were these: "I cannot teach what I do not understand. The stories come through me, not from me. I am only the loom on which they weave themselves." This humility, this recognition of himself as instrument rather than master, pleased Ixchel in ways she did not expect. She smiled, and in that smile the moon above, the empty moon, the dark moon, flickered once, as if remembering itself. "Then perhaps," she said, "we can learn together what comes through." And so began the unraveling. Night after night, when the moon was dark or when it was new, Ixchel would descend and sit beside Kawil at his loom. She showed him patterns from the celestial weaving, patterns that no mortal eye should see, the threads of fate and fortune, the warp of choice and the weft of consequence. And he, in turn, showed her something she had forgotten in her long existence: wonder. The simple joy of creation for its own sake, not as duty or cosmic necessity, but as an act of love. They wove together, their hands moving in rhythm, and the cloths they created were unlike anything that had existed before. In them the mortal and the divine intertwined. In them new stories were born, stories that the gods had not decreed, stories that fate had not determined, stories that chose themselves into being. And as they wove, they spoke. Ixchel told Kawil of the vast loneliness of the sky, of watching ages pass and mortals live and die like mayflies, of the weight of knowing all that would come to pass. Kawil told her of the opposite burden, the weight of not knowing, of walking blind through a world of mystery and danger, of the way each moment carried the terror of choice, the responsibility of free will. "But that is what makes it beautiful," Ixchel said one night. They had been working on a cloth that showed the sacred cenote at the heart of the city, the deep circular sinkhole that plunged down into the underworld's waters. That each moment is unrepeatable, that each choice matters because it might have been otherwise. "Does it not matter in the world above?" Kawil asked. "Do the gods not choose?" Ixchel was quiet for a long time, her hands still on the loom. "We choose," she said finally, "but we choose according to our nature. A god cannot act against what they are. We are not free in the way you are free. We are perfectly ourselves, which means we are perfectly bound." It was the saddest thing Kawil had ever heard. He set down his shuttle and turned to look at her fully. In the lamplight, her face was luminous, and for a moment he saw something move beneath the surface of her form, a suggestion of vastness, of power beyond reckoning. But then she met his eyes, and she was just a woman again, young and lovely and sad. "You are free now," he said quietly. "You are here. You chose to come." "Did I choose?" Ixchel whispered. "Or did I see the thread of this meeting already woven into the great pattern and simply follow where it led?" Kawil reached out and took her hand. It was a gesture of comfort, nothing more, but it was the first time they had touched skin to skin, and the contact sang through them both like lightning. In that moment of contact, Ixchel felt something she had not felt in all her ages of existence, the absolute present, the now that was not part of any pattern, not woven into any destiny. Simply this, his hand in hers, warm and alive and real. And Kowil, for his part, felt the vastness of her, the cosmic scope of her being, and was not afraid. Instead, he felt a recognition so profound it was like remembering something he had known before birth. This being of moonlight and water and endless time, she was not so different from him. She too was alone. She too was seeking. They became lovers that night, and in their union natural law bent. The first sign was the rain. It fell unseasonably, heavily, from skies that had been clear. The cenote rose, its waters swelling beyond their usual boundaries. The priests consulted their calendars and made offerings, but the rain continued. Ixchel, lying in Kowil's arms in the hours between midnight and dawn, could feel the pull of her divine obligations like a hook in her chest. She was needed above. The tides were confused without her. The waters of the world were losing their rhythm. But she did not go. She was learning something from Kowil, something dangerous and necessary. She was learning how to be selfish, how to put her own desire above duty, how to choose against her nature. It felt like dying and being reborn at once, like shedding a skin she had worn since the first days of creation. In the moon palace above, the celestial loom stood empty. The threads of fate hung untended, and the jaguar sun god, blazing across the day sky in his appointed rounds, noticed his consort's absence. At first he thought little of it. Ixchel had always been changeable, mysterious in her movements. But as days passed and then weeks, and still she did not return to the sky, he began to search for her. He found her, finally, by following the disturbances in the cosmic order. The threads of fate that led to her mortal lover glowed with a strange light, as if they were being written and rewritten with each passing moment. The jaguar sun god descended to earth in the full fury of his power, and the air above Kowil's city shimmered with heat. The stone buildings seemed to waver like mirages. The people fled indoors, away from his terrible radiance. He found Ixchel and Kowil together at the loom, weaving. They did not see him at first, so absorbed were they in their work and in each other. The jaguar sun god watched them, and what he felt was not anger. Gods do not feel anger in the way mortals do, but something colder and more terrible. He felt the disruption they represented, the threat to the order of all things. When he spoke, his voice was like heat made audible, like the sun at its apex. "Ixchel, you forget yourself. You forget what you are." She looked up then and saw him standing there, in his divine form, no longer a jaguar, but a being of pure solar fire, spotted with darkness like a jaguar's coat, beautiful and terrible, and utterly inhuman. She rose from the loom, but she did not bow. She did not lower her eyes. "I remember myself," she said. "For the first time in ages, I remember. You are the moon. You are the weaver of fate. You cannot abandon your station for—" He gestured at Kowil with something like disgust. "For this mortal amusement." "He is not an amusement," Ixchel said, and her voice carried the full weight of her divinity now. The walls of the workshop began to shine with reflected moonlight, though it was midday. "He is my choice, my free choice, something you would not understand. The jaguar sun god laughed, and it was a sound like forests burning. Free choice? You are a goddess. You are woven into the fabric of the cosmos. You have no more free choice than the sun has choice whether to rise. You are bound by what you are. You are perfectly yourself, and yourself is duty. Then I will become imperfect, Ixchel said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Kawil, who had stood silent through this exchange, finally spoke. His voice was steady despite the presence of the god before him. "My lord," he said, and though he had never seen the jaguar sun god before, he knew him by his radiance. "The fault is mine. I have kept her here. I have loved her. If there is punishment to be borne, let me bear it." The jaguar sun god turned his burning gaze on this mortal who dared to claim responsibility for a goddess's choices. He saw in Kawil not defiance, but something equally troubling: sincerity. The mortal truly believed he could shield Ixchel from consequences. It was the kind of beautiful, stupid bravery that mortals specialized in. "You think you can love a goddess?" the sun god said. "You think your mortal heart can hold the infinite? You will age and die while she remains eternal. You will crumble to dust while she dances on. What you call love is merely a mortal's confusion in the presence of the divine." "Perhaps," Kawil said, "but it is real, and it is mine, and she chose it." The jaguar sun god looked between them, his ancient consort, his cosmic counterbalance, and this mortal weaver who should have been nothing, who should have been invisible to divine eyes. He saw the truth of it then, written in the way they stood together, in the threads of fate that tangled around them like a web. This was not a passing fancy. This was not divine whim. This was something that could unmake the world. "You cannot have both," he said to Ixchel. "You cannot be both goddess and mortal lover. You cannot serve your cosmic duty and also this lesser love." "It is not lesser," Ixchel said softly. "That is what you do not understand. It is not lesser. It is other." "Then choose," the jaguar sun god said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute law. "Choose now. Return to your place in the heavens. Take up your loom. Be what you have always been. Or—" He paused, and in that pause, Kawil felt the possibilities narrowing, felt the great cosmic machinery grinding toward an inevitable conclusion. "Or," Ixchel prompted, "or become what you claim to want to be. Become mortal. Live as he lives, die as he will die. Give up your divinity, your power, your eternal nature. Walk the earth as a mortal woman until your thread is cut, and you descend to Xibalba like all the rest." Ixchel stared at him. Around them, the air seemed to crystallize, to freeze. In the moon palace above, the unattended loom pulsed with accumulated power. The threads of 10,000 fates hung waiting for her hand to guide them. The tides of the world's waters surged without her governance. Already the cenotes were flooding, the rivers rising. Already the cosmic balance was beginning to tip. "You cannot ask this of her," Kawil said, horror in his voice. "I will not let you—" But Ixchel raised a hand, silencing him gently. She was looking at the jaguar sun god with something like pity. "You think this is a punishment," she said. "You think offering me mortality is a threat, a price too high to pay. But you still do not understand what I have learned here." She turned to Kawil, and her eyes held all the light of the moon, all the depths of the sacred waters. "I have lived forever, and in forever I have never lived. I have been everything, and in being everything I have been nothing. I have had no self, only function, no desire, only duty. Until now." She turned back to the sun god. "I choose mortality," she said clearly. "I choose the time that ends. I choose the love that will break my heart because it cannot last forever. I choose Kawil." The jaguar sun god blazed brighter, and for a moment Kawil thought they would all be consumed in his fury. But the god was not angry. He was afraid. Afraid of what this meant, afraid of what would come. "You do not know what you are giving up," he said, and for the first time his voice held something like pleading. "You are the moon. Without you, without me, another will rise," Ixchel said. "That is the way of things. I have woven enough fates to know that nothing is irreplaceable, even goddesses, even gods." She held out her hands before her, palms up, and spoke words in a language older than speech, the language of first things, of cosmic unmaking. Light poured from her skin, silver and cool and terrible. It rose like smoke, like water vapor, like breath on a cold morning. It rose and kept rising, streaming from her body in ribbons of pure divine essence. Kawil watched in horror and wonder as the woman he loved unmade herself as a goddess. The light rose through the roof of the workshop, rose through the heavy air, rose to the heavens where it gathered above the moon palace, seeking form. And in the palace, in front of the abandoned loom, the light began to take shape. It formed into a figure, but not the young, beautiful Ixchel who even now was becoming mortal in Kawil's arms. This was the other face of the moon goddess, the face that had always existed in potential but had never fully manifested. The crone. Old beyond reckoning, fierce beyond measure, the crone Ixchel took form in the moon palace. Her face was seamed with age, crowned with a headdress of writhing snakes. In her gnarled hands she held not a weaving shuttle, but a great water jar full to the brim. She looked down at the world below and saw the flooding that had begun, the waters risen beyond their bounds because the young Ixchel had abandoned her post. The crone smiled, and it was not a gentle smile. If the young moon goddess had governed the waters with care and precision, the crone would govern them with fury. If the young goddess had woven fate with delicate attention to balance, the crone would weave with the wild creativity of age, the recklessness of one who has nothing left to lose. She was what Ixchel had been, transformed by what Ixchel had done. She was the goddess as consequence. The crone lifted the water jar and began to tip it. Below, in Kawil's city, the rain began again. But this was not ordinary rain. This was the rain of judgment, the rain of transformation. It fell in sheets, in torrents, and where it fell, things changed. The cenote overflowed its banks, the rivers burst their boundaries. The carefully ordered world of men began to dissolve back into the primordial waters from which it had emerged. In the workshop, Ixchel collapsed into Kawil's arms. The last of her divinity had drained away, and what remained was purely mortal. A woman, young and beautiful still, but now subject to all the limitations of flesh. She could feel it in her bones, the sudden weight of being contained in a single body, in a single time. It was crushing and exhilarating at once. "What have you done?" Kawil whispered, holding her. "What has happened?" Before Ixchel could answer, the jaguar sun god spoke. His radiance had dimmed, as if even he was shocked by what had transpired. "She has divided herself," he said. "The young goddess who could love has become mortal, and the divine essence she abandoned has taken the only other form the moon can take, the crone, the destroyer, the bringer of floods. You wanted free will?" He looked at Ixchel with something like sorrow. "You have chosen it, and your other self, the one who remains divine, will make choices of her own now. You have no control over what she does. No one does." As if in emphasis, the rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning illuminated the flooding streets. People were fleeing to higher ground, to the temples, carrying their children and whatever possessions they could save. "The crone will drown the world," the sun god said. "She is fury unleashed, The waters unchained. She is what the moon becomes when it stops caring for the earth. Carwyll looked at Ixchel, at the woman in his arms who had given up everything for him. Can you stop her? Can you? I am mortal now, Ixchel said, and her voice was hollow. I have no power over the divine. I am what I chose to be, free and powerless. The jaguar sun god turned to leave, to return to his own domain. But at the threshold he paused. There may be one way, he said, not looking back. A goddess may be moved by sacrifice. The crone is you, Ixchel, but she is also not you. She is the divine essence without the mortal love that softened it. She is pure cosmic law. But law can be satisfied. Balance can be restored. What balance? Carwyll demanded. What sacrifice? The one who caused the imbalance must restore it, the sun god said. A mortal who would love a goddess, who would draw her down from her duty, such a mortal is a thread out of place in the great weaving. To set the pattern right, the thread must be cut. Understanding came to Carwyll like cold water. You want me to die. I want nothing, the sun god said. I am simply telling you what must be done. You are the disruption. Remove yourself and the crone may be appeased, the flooding may stop, the world may continue. No, Ixchel said immediately, clutching Carwyll tighter. No, I will not allow it. I gave up my divinity. I gave up everything. I will not sacrifice him too. The jaguar sun god finally turned back to face them, and his expression was unreadable. Then do not, he said. Choose love over duty one more time. Let the world drown. At least you will drown together. And then he was gone, rising as a pillar of light, returning to the day sky where he belonged. Ixchel and Carwyll stood together in the workshop as the water began to seep in under the door. Outside, the screaming had begun, people calling for help, for salvation, for their gods to intervene. But the gods were not intervening. The crone above poured out her water jar with the steady inevitability of cosmic law, and below, the mortal world dissolved. It is not right, Ixchel said, her voice shaking. It is not right that loving you should destroy everything. It is not right that the price of choice should be annihilation. Carwyll gently freed himself from her embrace and walked to his loom. The cloth they had been weaving together still hung there, half-finished. It showed the cenote, the sacred sinkhole, and in its dark waters a reflection that was not quite a reflection, a door between worlds, a passage. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he understood what it was showing him. He had woven his own fate without knowing it. It is right, he said quietly. Or if it is not right, it is at least true. The gods do not love as mortals love. You said this yourself. They cannot. They are bound by their nature. But I am mortal. I am free. And freedom means I can choose to die for something I believe in. No, Ixchel said again, but there was desperation in her voice now. She had heard the truth in his words. Carwyll turned to her and took her hands, mortal hands now, hands that would age and wrinkle, and someday lose their strength. You gave up eternity for me, he said. You gave up your power, your place among the stars. You made yourself small and finite so we could be together. How could I do less? How could I let the world drown rather than balance what I have disrupted? But we will have no time, Ixchel said, and tears ran down her face, mortal tears, salt water, the first she had ever shed. We will have had only these few weeks together. Is that worth dying for? Carwyll smiled, and it was gentle and sad and absolutely certain. I have held infinity in my arms, he said. I have loved a goddess. I have had something that was never meant to be mine. These few weeks are worth more than a long life of ordinary days. I would not trade them. I would not change them, even if I knew then what I know now. He kissed her, and it was both first kiss and farewell. Then he picked up a knife from his workbench, the same knife he used to cut threads when a weaving was complete, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Ixchel asked, though she knew. "To the cenote," Kawil said, "to the sacred waters, to offer myself to the crone, to the goddess you were and are not. Perhaps she will find my death sufficient payment. Perhaps not, but I have to try. The people of this city do not deserve to drown, because I loved too well." Ixchel followed him out into the flooded streets. The water was knee-deep now and rising. Bodies floated past, not all of them human. Animals fleeing the jungle, birds drowned in flight. The rain fell like a wall, and above it, visible through breaks in the clouds, the moon hung swollen and full, watching with the crone's eyes. They made their way to the cenote at the heart of the city. It had become a churning maelstrom, its waters risen to the very edge of the carved stone rim. Here the priests had always made offerings to the gods, precious things, jade and gold, and copal incense. Sometimes, in times of greatest need, they had offered human lives, sending the chosen ones into the dark water to carry prayers to the underworld. Carwheel stood at the edge of the cenote and looked down into its depths. In the roiling water, he could see reflections that were not reflections, the underworld of Xibalbai waiting below, the realm of death gods and transformation. He had woven this moment without knowing it. He had seen it in his threads and dismissed it as symbolic, but it had been literal all along. This was where his thread ended. He turned to Ixchel one last time. "I do not regret loving you," he said. "I do not regret what we had. Even if this is the price, even if my life is the cost, I would choose you again. You need to know that." "I know," Ixchel whispered. "I know, and that is what makes it unbearable." Kawil prepared to step forward, to throw himself into the sacred waters, to offer his life in exchange for the world's continuation. But Ixchel grabbed his arm, held him back. "Wait," she said. "There is another way. There must be another way. I will not let you do this alone." She closed her eyes, and though she was mortal now, though her divinity had drained away, she reached for something deeper than power. She reached for connection. She reached for the part of herself that had become the crone, the fierce old goddess above who even now poured out her waters in wrathful judgment. "Sister," Ixchel called, and her voice seemed to carry impossibly far, despite her mortality. "Other self, I know you can hear me. I know you are me and I am you, divided by choice but still one in essence. Listen to me." The rain paused just for a moment. Above, the moon seemed to pulse, to flicker. The crone was listening. "You are angry," Ixchel continued. "You are fury and judgment and the law that binds all things. You are what I was when I forgot how to bend, when I knew only duty and not love. But I learned something in becoming mortal. I learned that law without mercy is tyranny. I learned that order without compassion is death. You are me without love, but you are still me. Somewhere in your cosmic heart, you remember what I remember." From above a voice came, ancient and creaking and cold as the far side of the moon. The crone spoke, and her words were like boulders grinding. "You abandoned your duty. You broke the natural order. You chose mortal love over eternal responsibility. Why should I not drown everything you love? Why should I not show you the consequence of your choice?" "Because," Ixchel said, "consequence without meaning is just cruelty. And you are not cruel. You are fierce, yes. You are uncompromising, but you are not meaningless. You are the moon that destroys so the moon can be reborn. You are the water that floods so new life can grow. You are transformation, and transformation requires that something be preserved to transform." The rain began again, harder than before. The cenote surged higher. But Ixchel did not stop speaking. "I offer you a different balance," she said. "Not his death, not his sacrifice alone, but ours together. Let him go into the waters, but let me go with him. Let us both descend to Xibalba, 2 lives instead of one. The goddess made mortal and the mortal who loved her. Send us to the underworld. Let us be transformed there. We will become something new, something that bridges the gap between divine and mortal. We will be the reminder that love is not always a breaking of law. Sometimes it is a making of new law entirely." Coweel looked at her in shock. "Ixchel, no, you do not have to." "I do," she said simply. "You were willing to die for me. How could I do less? We will go together or not at all." Above, the crone was silent. The water jar in her hands hung suspended, half-tipped. She was considering. She was, and this was new, this was strange, she was feeling something other than fury. She was feeling what her other self had learned. She was feeling curiosity about this thing called choice, this thing called love. Finally, she spoke again. "Very well, let it be as you say. Both of you will descend to Xibalba. Both of you will be transformed. But know this, you will not return as you are. The underworld changes all things. You may become monsters. You may become spirits. You may be scattered into separate elements, never to reunite. The only certainty is that you will not remain human. Do you accept this?" Ixchel and Coweel looked at each other. In his eyes she saw the courage that had first drawn her to him, the willingness to face the unknown without flinching. In her eyes he saw the love that had made her give up eternity, the love that made her willing to face any transformation if it meant they faced it together. "We accept," they said in unison. The crone lowered her water jar. The rain began to ease, though it did not stop entirely. The world would not drown, but neither would it be unchanged. The waters had already risen too far for that. There would be scars, losses, grief, but there would also be continuance. There would be life. At the cenote's edge, Ixchel and Coweel joined hands. They did not speak again. There was nothing left to say. They had made their choice. Now they would live with its consequences, or die with them, or become something else entirely. Together they stepped forward into the sacred waters. The cenote received them like an embrace, like a mouth, like a door. Down they fell through the dark water, down past the limestone walls carved by ages of erosion, down past the bones of ancient offerings, down into the realm of Xibalba where the death gods waited, and transformation reigned. Above, the crone watched them go. She felt something then, something she had not expected to feel, a kind of satisfaction that was not the satisfaction of judgment fulfilled, but something softer, stranger, pride, perhaps, or hope. Her other self, her mortal self, had done something brave, had chosen love knowing the cost, had found a third way when only two seemed possible. Slowly the crone began to weave again, not at the celestial loom, that would come later, but with the waters themselves. She wove the floods back into their proper channels. She wove the rivers back into their banks. She wove the rain into a gentle rhythm, a sustaining pattern. And in her weaving she remembered. She remembered what it was to be young. She remembered what it was to love. She did not become soft. She was still the crone, still fierce, still uncompromising. But she became something else as well. She became complete. In the underworld of Xibalba, in the deepest dark, Ixchel and Coweel fell through water that was not water, through space that was not space. They fell together, hands clasped, until they landed on something solid, a floor of polished obsidian that reflected no light because there was no light to reflect. Around them, presences gathered, the death gods, the lords of Xibalba, the ones who tested heroes and challenged the worthy. But these gods did not attack or threaten. They simply watched, curious about these newcomers, a mortal and an ex-goddess, bound together by choice, willing to transform rather than live apart. One of the death gods spoke, its voice like dry leaves, like dust, like time itself. "What do you seek in our realm?" Coweel, ever brave, answered first. "We seek transformation. We seek to become something new, something that can bridge the mortal and the divine." "And what makes you think," the death god asked, "that such a thing is possible?" Ixchel answered this time, "Because it has already happened. I was divine and became mortal. We were separate and became joined. Every moment is a transformation. Every choice is a becoming. We simply ask to continue what we have already begun." The death gods conferred among themselves in whispers that sounded like wind through empty places. Finally, they reached a decision. "You will be transformed," the death god said, "but not as you imagine. You will become neither mortal nor divine, but something between. You will become a story." Before either of them could ask what this meant, the transformation began. Their bodies began to dissolve. But it was not painful. It was like waking from a dream, like stepping out of heavy clothes, like shedding a chrysalis. Their flesh became light, became sound, became words. Their love, which had been private and particular, became universal and archetypal. They became the story that would be told forever after, the story of the goddess who loved so well she became mortal, and the mortal who loved so well he was willing to die. As stories they left Xibalba. They rose up through the sacred waters of the cenote. They emerged not as bodies, but as myth, as memory, as meaning. They spread across the land in the mouths of those who survived the flood. They were carved into stone temples. They were woven into textiles by weavers who felt their hands guided by something beyond themselves. They were whispered to children at night, told around fires, remembered. The story went like this, more or less. Once a goddess loved a mortal man, and for that love she gave up her divinity. And the mortal man loved her so much he was willing to give up his life. Together they went into the sacred waters and were transformed into something neither mortal nor divine, into a truth that could be told but never fully understood. The truth that love is worth its cost. The truth that choice is freedom, even when the choice is sacrifice. The truth that transformation is not death but becoming. And in the moon palace above the clouds, the crone continued her weaving. But now sometimes, when she wove, she found new threads appearing in the pattern, threads that glowed with a strange light, threads that moved in ways threads should not move. These were the threads of stories that chose themselves into being, stories that were not preordained but created, stories that bridged fate and free will. She did not pull these threads out or try to control them. She let them weave themselves into the greater pattern, curious to see what would emerge. She was still the crone, still fierce, still the bringer of floods when floods were needed. But she was also the part of Ixchel that remembered love. She was the goddess who had learned that law without mercy is tyranny, that order without compassion is death. And so the balance was maintained, but it was a different balance than before, not the static balance of unchanging law, but the dynamic balance of constant transformation. The world continued to turn, the moon continued its cycles, the waters rose and fell according to their nature. But now, sometimes, lovers looked at the moon and saw in its changing face a story of sacrifice and choice. Now, sometimes, weavers felt their hands guided by something beyond themselves as they created patterns no one had taught them. Now, sometimes, people stood at the edge of cenotes and remembered that some depths led not to death, but to transformation. The story of Ixchel and Coweel became one of the old stories, one of the true stories, the kind that are told at the edge of the known world when the fire is burning low and the jungle presses close. It became a story about the price of love, yes, but also about love's worth, about the difference between being bound by nature and being bound by choice, about the truth that the gods do not love as mortals do, and that is both their power and their poverty. And in the telling and retelling, the story continued to transform, as stories do. Each teller added their own understanding, their own longing, their own experience of love and loss. The story became a living thing, a thread that wove itself through generations, connecting those who heard it to something larger than themselves, which was, in the end, what Ixchel and Kawil had become. Not dead, not gone, but transformed into the very thing they had created together. A story of love that broke the natural order, and in breaking it revealed a deeper order still. The order of transformation, the order of choice, the order of becoming. Above, the crone smiles her fierce smile and continues weaving. Below, the world continues its dance of creation and destruction. And between, in the space that is neither heaven nor earth, neither mortal nor divine, the story lives. The thread that drowned the world and saved it, the love that ended and never ends. The gods do not love as mortals do, but once a goddess learned how, and in learning, she and her lover became something new, something that could contain both the infinite and the finite, both duty and desire, both fate and free will. That is the story. That is the truth. That is the thread that runs through everything, drowning and saving, ending and beginning, dying and becoming. That is what the Maya knew, whispered in the smoke of copal incense, carved into stone temples that stand even now, half swallowed by the jungle. That love is not the breaking of natural order, but the revelation of a more fundamental order still, the order of transformation, of choice, of becoming something other than what you were. The story ends, the story continues. The thread is cut, the thread weaves on. Both are true. Both have always been true. The moon looks down on the world with two faces, young and old, merciful and fierce, waxing and waning. And those who know the story understand that both faces are necessary, both faces are holy. Both faces are the truth of what it means to love, so well you are willing to be unmade and remade again and again, through all the cycles of time. This is the story of Ixchel and Kawil. This is the thread that drowned the world. This is the love that broke the natural order and revealed the deeper order beneath. This is how it was. This is how it is. This is how it will be, told again and again, as long as there are voices to tell it and hearts to understand. The story is complete. The weaving is done. But the pattern it made continues, rippling out through time, transforming all it touches. As above, so below. As then, so now. As divine, so mortal. As love, so sacrifice. So transformation, so truth.